What a good segue to talking about the health fascism of some of our politicians and health bureaucrats. Another example today, Australian James Turbot rushes back from Belgium to go and see his mother who's dying in Perth. Can't get a direct flight, he has to go via Melbourne, and that's as far as he actually manages to get. He tests twice, negative for the virus, but Victoria still won't let him go to Perth, and West Australia won't let him come. And so his mum dies without him having had the chance to see her. The monsters. You know, these people they claim to be saving us, these health fascists, they're in fact inflicting gratuitous pain. Pain that will never leave James Turbot. Now, it might be that we may one day be able to cut through all this kind of stupid nonsense with something that horrifies a lot of people. Vaccine passports, documents that show you've been vaccinated or tested negative, recovered from the virus, whatever, so you're free to travel. A lot of people are totally against this, I know. They don't want the government to have that kind of control. Or, in fact, the power to virtually force them to have injections that they don't trust. But a poll in the Herald Sun of Victoria today did show that 3/4 of Victorians surveyed, 3/4 did say that people who were vaccinated should be spared from restrictions, and that does imply a vaccine passport to prove it. And overseas, that's exactly what seems to be happening. Joining me is Sky News North American correspondent Annelise Nielsen. Annelise, great to talk to you again. First of all, Australians are not free to leave to travel overseas, and we ban tourists from coming here. That's not the case in an increasing number of countries, is it?
No, we're pretty much the outlier in every developed country in the world on this. And this is why it's becoming increasingly extraordinary that there's no plan from the Australian government. What we're seeing is countries around the world opening up. Canada from the first week of July is going to allow its own citizens to come back without doing hotel quarantine if they're vaccinated. Europe's on the way to opening up. France isn't requiring that anymore. About 16 different countries are now all agreed to share that vaccine information. But from what I understand, when you're on the ground travelling there's very little enforcement of that as it is. The UK too even is looking at opening up their restrictions because they're facing a major lawsuit from airlines because of the ongoing economic impact of these shutdowns. And so this is where the Australian solution, it's worked obviously. Australia has been an outlier in how well the pandemic's been handled so far, but this is the extraordinary moment where there's no plan to allow travellers to come back in to their own country. And we're talking about Australian citizens here. No other country in the world is doing that. And so that's where this conversation is becoming increasingly more important. Why isn't there a plan? Australia isn't letting its own citizens come in without hotel quarantine, and those numbers are very limited. When you compare it to Canada, which has had a very similar approach to managing the pandemic, even now they're saying in a few weeks they're going to be allowing non-Canadian citizens to come back in with the same ease of travel if they can show that they're vaccinated. This idea of vaccine passports, this isn't unprecedented. If you've travelled around Africa in any kind of recent time, you would have had to produce a certificate saying you'd had the yellow fever vaccine. And most US states are on board with this. Quite a few have banned this, but New York's been the first to have an app where you can show that you've been vaccinated. Otherwise, you have your certificate from when you had the vaccine. So this is why it's becoming an even more interesting conversation than it's been in the past.
No, you remind me now, Annelise. I've got to look this up. I remember the first time I went overseas, I had to have this little yellow form with the sort of medicines and all that I'd taken. I think anti-malarial or something like that. I'll look it up and come back to the audience on that one. But what this means for Australians...
There you go, you've already got a vaccine passport.
I know, I better dig it up. Probably my memory box in the garage. But Annelise... it does mean that this does affect Australians, doesn't it? I mean, we can have the debate here and we might say no to vaccine passports, whatever. But the point is, if in all these countries, and countries like Germany are talking about having them or starting to introduce them, it means we can't travel overseas ourselves unless we have them.
Well, I think the question is just what's the plan? Australians are perfectly entitled to ask of their government what's the plan beyond, oh, look, probably 2022, don't know. We're the only developed country in the world right now that doesn't have some kind of plan out of this. And so that's the question that people should be asking. Why? Why don't we have a solution to this? Why aren't we taking a more serious approach to opening our borders again? And a lot of that comes down to the vaccine rollout, which we know hasn't been going well in Australia. Considering that other countries are looking at hitting that 70% target, we know that's what Canada's aiming for, but the approach in America has been, look, if you haven't got the vaccine by now, that's your choice. Herd immunity is there to cover those who cannot get vaccinated for various reasons. But if you have the vaccine, you do have that coverage. You won't end up in hospital, is what the data shows, if you have the vaccine. And so that's the choice you've made. So that's where we should be asking the government, what's the plan?
Well, I like that approach a lot. In fact, there was a lot of support in this Herald Sun survey for exactly that thing. Like by the time we get to, rolling out most of the vaccines, if you've been offered the vaccine and you refuse, your call. Most Victorians say, let's just drop the borders and it's on you if you get sick. And I think that's perfectly good. That treats us all like responsible adults. Annelise, Nielsen, thank you so much for your time.